So today's session we are going to discuss about production media in industrial fermentation. So in the previous classes we have discussed about how to isolate an organism from a desired source of soil, then how to improve its quality by strain improvement method, how to cultivate it, how to preserve it, all those things. Okay, so the next important aspect in the industrial microbiology is to design a proper fermentation media or a production media. Okay, so what is a production media? That is, production media should support in maintaining your production strain, as well as it should support the entire fermentation process. So such type of media is called what? The production media. So what is the definition of production media? It is the growth media which is meant for what? For the cultivation of the production strain, and subsequently it is used for what? The fermentation process. Such type of media is called what? The production media. Okay, so if you see the production media, one of the most important problem is to meet the desired properties, or to meet the optimum condition for the support of the growth of the microorganism. Okay, so which is always done by using trial and error method to form a proper media for the fermentation process. So you just think an example that in batch fermentation process, so the fermenter is filled with what? The production media, leaving a head space. You know why you have to leave the head space. The production strain is added in a particular weight according to the type of fermentation process. Either it can be a surface culture or it can be a submerged culture method. You are seeding the organism and the fermentation process will be going on. So to check intermittently, or to carry out the fermentation process properly, or to distribute the things properly inside the fermentation media, it is always better to have a liquid media comparing to a solid media, because it is always advantageous to have a solid media comparing to a liquid media. Okay, so when you are forming a production media, so there are a lot of parameters should be kept in your mind. So it should support in all the way, that is the growth and multiplication of the organism should be supported in each and every aspect. So you should keep so many parameters in your mind before forming a production media. Okay, so we will see what are all the important parameters to be kept in mind before going for the production media, before characterizing the production media. So the first and foremost thing is chemical composition. You know that what do you mean by chemical composition? The chemical which you are going to add in the media to support the growth of the organism. Okay, so the production media must have a suitable chemical composition to support the growth of the organism. So generally the media should contain what? A carbon source, we all know that, a nitrogen source, growth factors, mineral salts, all those things. So it differs from organism to organism. Some organism will prefer some sort of carbon source, some organism will prefer for other sort of carbon source. So it all depends upon the type of organism and type of fermentation which you are carrying out. You have to add different kinds of chemicals in the production media. So it means that different types of carbon, different types of nitrogen, growth factors and mineral salts, all those things should be supplemented, depends upon the type of fermentation process. The second thing is precursor. To start up the fermentation process, some fermentation process require what? A precursor, for example penicillin. Okay, in penicillin fermentation the precursors are must, otherwise this fermentation will not be take up so fast. So to make the fermentation process smooth and easier, there should be some precursor to be added in the media. Okay, the next important thing is buffering capacity. The buffering capacity means that is the maintaining the pH throughout the fermentation process. Okay, it may affect your organism as well as your product. Therefore, it is essential to have a proper buffering agents in the fermentation or production media. Okay, so the maintenance of the pH in the optimum range is necessary for making the process successful. Since acid or basic components depends on the nature of the fermentation process accumulated during the progress of fermentation process. So in order to control the pH of the media, the buffers should be added into the media. Okay, either it is alkaline or it is an acidic, it all depends upon what type of pH variation happens inside the media. So a media which is containing considerable quantities of proteins, peptides and amino acids possess a good buffering capacity in the pH range near neutrality, otherwise it may spoil. Okay, so additional buffering capacity in the pH range is also provided by using phosphates like mono hydrogen phosphate or dihydrogen phosphate, sodium phosphate. So many chemicals are used to maintain the pH inside the media. So buffering capacity also should be taken care during designing of a production media. Next important thing is during fermentation process there will be lot of forms will be produced. So these forms will interfere with your fermentation process. Okay, because foaming is a serious problem in the fermentation industry, since it may aid in contaminating the fermentation media and possibly may cause other problems in the fermentation. So hence we have to add anti-foaming agents, like one example I will tell you, that is lard oil, which is mixed with octadecanol for the penicillin fermentation. Okay, so this will avoid what foaming. So this should be used for controlling the foams, and the anti-foaming agents may added at the stage of the media makeup, means before sterilization, or they may be incorporated after sterilization, or when or during fermentation also, if it is required, it should be added. Okay, so the foaming is an important problem in the fermentation industry. So anti-foaming agent, addition of anti-foaming agent is desirable to carry out a successful fermentation process. Next important thing is toxicity, the accumulation of the toxic components which will kill the microorganism which is doing the fermentation process, or these toxic materials will be incorporated with your final product and which will produce undesirable effect in the final user. So it is essential to check the toxicity. So being an ideal fermentation production media, it should be free from any toxic effect on culture or product formation. So this should be taken care during what the formulation of your production media. Okay. Next is consistency. So for example, in aerobic conditions or aerobic fermentation, it is necessary to supply sterile air into the media. Under such circumstances, liquid media allow the diffusion of the air throughout the media under agitation. Thus, this explains why most of the fermentation process make use of liquid media. We discussed this previously also. It is better to have water, a liquid media comparing to a solid media, because of this thing, that is nothing but consistency. In addition to this, the fermentation media should not be viscous, since the viscous nature of the media creates difficulty in the penetration of the air interior to the media. In other words, air is not easily absorbed by the liquid media. Okay, we have a lot of things for that, aeration, agitation, all those things will diffuse your air, or it will spread the air homogeneously throughout your media. So it is always better to have what a liquid media comparing to a solid media. The next important thing is the most dreadful enemy for a microbiologist, that is nothing but contamination. That is, certain conditions of the production media are helpful to check the contamination. For example, low pH values in citric acid production using Aspergillus niger keep the contamination under check. Moreover, media having low pH values may be sterilized at low temperature. Okay, so the contamination should be avoided. I told you that is certain conditions of the production media, it is helpful to check the contamination. I will tell you one example, that is for example, you are having a citric acid production. So the end product is what? The acid. So the pH will be less. So that sterilization should be done in low temperature. So all this ideas should be there, or all this information should be there before formalizing your production media or before going for a fermentation process. Next important thing, all this fermentation process, finally we want a product. The important thing is recovery. So the recovery of the desired product is an important operation affecting the final cost of the product, right? So therefore, the components of the media should be such that the separation and extraction of the product becomes easy and cheaper. Okay, it means that the components which you are using for the production of the production media should not interfere with the downstream process or recovery process. The next thing is availability of raw material, very important thing. The raw materials required for designing of the production media should be freely available in large quantities at reasonable price. That is very important, economical aspect. Okay, this may explain you that is why non-synthetic media or a crude media find wide application in large scale fermentation process, because economical, right? So we will discuss what are all the raw materials which can be used for the fermentation process. For example, if you are using a synthetic media, that it may not be that much economical. Okay, so it is if you have a raw material which is readily available in the natural source, which can be used, which can support a fermentation process very effectively, then that will be always better comparing to going for a synthetic media which is costly. Okay, so these are all the various parameters should be kept in mind while designing your fermentation production media. So what are all the parameters we have discussed? First one is chemical composition, the second one precursors, buffering capacity, anti-foaming agent, toxicity, consistency, contamination, recovery, and availability of what? Raw material. Okay, so when we are talking about availability of raw materials, Okay, so what is the most important raw material which we are using in the fermentation industry? We will see. So many different types of raw materials are used in different types of industrial fermentation process. Usually a crude nutritive sources are preferred. Since they are economical, so we can go for that. So if you see, mainly the agricultural products are utilized as a source of raw material in fermentation industry. Okay, so if you see, many of the fermentation process is mainly the agricultural waste which we are mainly using for the fermentation process. Why we are going for agricultural materials for as a raw material? We will discuss what are all the reasons by which we are going for agricultural materials as raw material. So okay, so the first and foremost reason is agricultural wastes are produced in large quantities. For example, nearly 2 billion tons of animal waste alone are produced annually in most of the countries, agricultural based countries. I just gave a reference that it's around 2 billion. It all depends upon how big the country is. So approximately a huge amount of agricultural waste will be produced every year, so that it will be highly economical. Okay, the second important thing is most of these wastes have high biological oxygen demand. Okay, you know that by BOD, that is biological oxygen demand is there. So which have the potential, this BOD, this particular compound which is having high BOD are a potential pollution hazard. So it is very expensive to dispose of this waste within the federal environmental standards, so that instead of disposing it, we can use it for what, or we can use it for the fermentation process, so that agricultural material, since it is having high BOD, which is a threat for what the environmental condition, so this can be used for what the fermentation process. The next important thing is these wastes contain large amount of potentially usable proteins and carbohydrates. So in view of this, the increasing worldwide demand of protein now and expected rise in the demand of the protein in the next few years, it would be desirable to recover the proteins and carbohydrate materials present in the waste. Since the proteins and carbohydrates are rich in all those things, and we don't have any use with that, we want to throw that. Instead of that, we can use it as a raw material. Okay, so next the next important parameter, the caloric value of the waste is recovery. It is having high energy, we just discussed, right? So which can be recovered as a biogas or ethanol, that is natural resources, or we can reuse it once the fermentation process is over, or once the agricultural use is over, which can be collected, and that energy can be converted into what, a biogas or ethanol, whatever it is. Okay, so most of the agricultural wastes are renewable, and hence there is no shortage of fermentable substrate. Okay, it is renewable, that is agricultural purpose is over. Now it is a waste. Okay, now it can be used for what, the fermentation process, so that there will not be any shortage in that. Okay, so if you see economically also, it involves only little cost. Okay, it is not, we are not going to synthesize a new raw material which is already available, which is already used, so that waste of that agriculture can be used for fermentation process. Therefore there is no much cost involved in this. Okay, and the most important thing, these agricultural wastes are not a part of human food chain. Okay, we are not going to consume that. So it is not going to compete with man's food sources. So this in this aspect also, it is safe and it is good to have agricultural waste materials as a raw materials for your fermentation process. Okay, so what are all the advantages of using agricultural waste as raw materials? It is there in a large quantity, and it is having high BOD, so that we can transfer that for this type of process, and it contains potentially usable proteins and carbohydrates which can be used, and it can be used for the production of the biogas and ethanol, that is the biofuels. And these wastes can be, it is not a part of what the food chain of human being, therefore it will not cause any shortage of food materials for human society also. Okay, so in all these aspects, these raw materials can be used as what, the major source for fermentation process, or raw material for the fermentation process. Okay, so in the next class we will discuss about what are all the different carbon sources, nitrogen sources, or raw materials which can be used for what, can be used for as a production media for effective fermentation process. Thank you.